Life isn't about quotes about life.
Welcome back to episode 29 of the Deskbound Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, David London, and today I'm here with my friend Lee Boyce. He's a strength and conditioning coach, and in my opinion, arguably one of the best coaches in Toronto when it comes to fitness and training for life. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how to get stronger for life, some of Lee's core philosophies, and talking about coming back stronger from injury. So super excited to have you today, my man.
Hey, man, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be doing this. I was looking forward to this one ever since we had our pre-conversation.
Yeah, so what are some of your core philosophies? I know a lot of time you talk about helping people like understand what the right way to get started with fitness is, understanding, what is functional for them. And you talk a lot about, doing the right exercises for your body on your page.
Yeah, so there's so much that I can say in response to this, but basically my core philosophy is truthfully that everybody is different, and it's going to require a lot of individualized approaches in order to get the best result for yourself and for your own body. I give a lot of talk about like leverages and anthropometry and stuff like that when I do my uh, articles or videos, or I release content, or even when I personal train somebody. And so that individualization between client to client, it really matters. But honestly, if we're trying to train for life and we're trying to train for the long haul, we're trying to train for sustainability, then we have to look at things from a different perspective than just looking at one aspect of fitness, which is where a lot of people go wrong, and that is strength. And there's a lot more to it than just strength. And once we got that covered, we got to look at other areas.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when everyone first starts, they're like, what program is going to get me abs? What program is going to build me muscle? And they think there's like a one person fits all. And it's not for a while that you find these programs don't really work for you. Like, you're like, why did this guy get, ripped abs in 3 months on the Kino Body program? And I just, look the same after 3 months.
Yeah, and the here and now approach that a lot of people like to take on, and even the here and now approach that a lot of companies or trainers or industries or whatever like to sort of profess or purport that they can get you to achieve. That's what needs to be sort of removed or taken down a notch in the fitness industry, because it's misleading to a lot of people, and it can give people wrong, false hopes, and it can give people reason to believe that these kinds of results, even if they do make radical changes in very short periods of time, that these kinds of results are normal and that they should be achieved and they should be sought after, instead of thinking about things from a much more sustainable perspective, which will cover a longer period of time. So that's the first and foremost thing, and it's going to come from educating the masses much more so than just finding more and more qualified trainers. It's going to come from letting the public knowledge about fitness and health increase for free. And once that happens, it's going to start weeding out a lot of the snake oil trainers that are out there, so that they're not even going to have a chance to have a job, because nobody's going to believe what they're saying in the first place.
Yeah, it's really cool how with social media we can empower a lot of our clients or potential clients or even our fan base, especially with like a lot of the content you share. You really make it clear and your opinion is strong, and you're really showing the science there, especially with all your articles as well of some of the right ways to get started and some of the the mistakes people fall into. I know like you had some posts you were talking about like form and execution and stuff like that. And it's things that we tend to, overlook when we're first getting started.
Yeah, the foundation is the key, and having that foundation where you're doing the basics and you're understanding just how to use your body and how to move your body, achieving that groundwork, the mobility, manipulating body weight, and then getting into the fundamental movement patterns. These kinds of things are going to be the most important thing for you to, just get going in the right direction and get one foot in the front of the other in the right way, rather than skipping 10 million steps and then you do something that you might be able to pull off, but that's very advanced, but you're not able to pull it off for too long. And 3 weeks down the road you have an injury and you've got all kinds of chronic pain, you don't really know why. So honestly, the foundation first is going to be the best way to do it, and there's a lot of different deviations and different variations that you can do within that foundation if you just get creative enough and if you're listening to the right sources, and it can give you an endless amount of combinations and different styles of workouts within that.
Yeah, luckily I was able to start. I know we talked earlier, but I started with gymnastics and bodyweight training, and how I'm super grateful for that foundation it gave me because I was always, a movement first guy, mobility first guy, and then I got into yoga, and it's really helped me, you know, avoid a lot of injuries, but also educate my clients, about the importance of starting with mastering your body weight. Because I feel like you need that body awareness for it to transfer to other areas of your life, even if you're strength training just to be strong for life, or you want to improve your posture. Having that awareness is something that's crucial for a lot of people tend to neglect.
Yeah, 100%. So, having that foundation of the body weight stuff, or just movement before you start thinking about anything else, even if your goal is to get bigger and that's going to require a lot of isolation training, for example, even still, knowing how to move and loading movements rather than just moving loads, knowing that it's not about muscle groups first, it's about patterns first. These kinds of things are going to be invaluable to somebody's progress and journey overall. That's why 9 times out of 10, you could tell in a coach, number one, not only from the way they train, but also just in the way that they coach, who was an athlete first versus somebody who might not have had any athletic background whatsoever, but still immersed themselves in the fitness world. And it's not to take away anything from either group, but the people who are the athletes first, they usually have a better idea of how to move well and how to have that sort of fluidity in their movements compared to actually just thinking about, okay, this movement right here that I bend my elbow equals biceps, and that's it. So, it's a very subtle distinction, but it's definitely something that's still noteworthy enough by a trained eye. And finding that foundation, that athletic background, or trying to create an athletic background in yourself where you can learn movements first compared to just thinking about muscles and muscle groups, it's going to go a really long way. And it's probably going to keep you injury free for a longer period of time as well.
Yeah, I know for sure. Like the movement patterns are so crucial, and it's starting to become more popular. Like people are talking about, mastering the hip hinge and the squat and making sure you have full shoulder range of motion. Whereas, when I started working at 9 years ago, it was just, go buy P90X and follow this 7 days a week, and then, do yoga once a week. But I really like how you mentioned the 11 different components of fitness, because it opens a lot of eyes and a lot of doors. Like you can, you don't necessarily need to do one avenue that you're not particularly fond of. Like if you don't like lifting weights, there's so many other forms of fitness you can get into. And I think that's where it's, our role as the trainers to help people find things that are fun for them, and then they're going to help them build up that foundations for longevity.
Yeah. So, with strength training, and this is where the strength and conditioning world often drops the ball, if you ask me. The strength and conditioning world is very, very focused on the strength part of that, the strength aspect of that term. And they really tend to believe, a lot of trainers, and for a long time I was part of the problem too, we'll promote that strength is the most important thing, and it is, but then we'll go and say that there should really not be any ceiling as far as how strong you get, and when you stop focusing on strength in lieu of something else that might be a little bit more demanding of your attention, or that should be more demanding of your attention. So, all of a sudden, a Turkish get up, it's not enough to be doing that with a 36-kilogram kettlebell. Now we're trying to get heavier and heavier in these movements that might be more focused on patterning and focused on mobility and focused on the conditioning or cardio aspect of it or whatnot. And I'm using that one exercise, but I could be using a lot of different things instead. Um, Exercises in the weight room that only focus on trying to, like, there's no point to me in trying to rack the weight in a face pull, or trying to stack up as much weight as possible in a rear leg elevated split squat. Some of these aren't geared towards lifting as heavy as you possibly can and continually making progression in that one area, which is progressive overload. We got to think about things from a different perspective, especially considering the fact that there's going to be some form of collateral damage that every heavy lift creates for us. It's just a matter of how resilient we are in order to deal with that, and what kinds of things that we're doing on the side in order to sort of manage that. As you said, 11 components of strength and fitness, strength being one. We haven't talked about balance, we haven't talked about agility, cardiorespiratory capacity, coordination, reaction time, speed, power, like all of these different things, they're just as important. Body composition is another one. Talk about a lot of people who are very, very strong, but they also have very, very high body fat percentages. Well, that's going to show that there's a demonstration there that there might not be optimized fitness across the board. it might be skewed in one area, in one particular direction, a lot more than it needs to be. And then all of a sudden, being able to deadlift 700 pounds is not really as useful when you can't catch the bus because you can't run for 10 seconds. You know what I mean? And or you're walking around all labored because of the fact that your joints have taken a beating from all of this heavy lifting you've been doing. So, I'm going off on a tangent here, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot more to it than just strength. And strength is a piece of the pie, but once we've got a hold on it, we got to start looking at other pieces of the pie that can really help our fitness and our other capacities.
Yeah, that's really where mobility is coming for me, because I know like after I stopped doing gymnastics, I really wanted to get into powerlifting. But I just noticed, every time I was really peaking my strength and, felt like the strongest in my life is, that's when I started to get injured and I feel achy in my shoulders. But like mentally I had a block. I was like, why is this happening? Like I'm benching, 2 plates for like 3 reps and I've never done this before. And I'm doing muscle ups and all this great stuff, and my squats like at 3 plates, but why do I start to feel those aches and pains creeping up? It's really interesting. Like I know we talked about previously that when you feel you're strongest, that's like, what is the body doing leading up to this injury?
Yeah. There's so much of a lot of programs out there and a lot of strength training programs and so on. They really depend on the starting point of the lifter. And that's the thing that they can't really tell you. The program can't tell you where your starting point is, but it can give you a great set of workouts to do in order for you to get stronger, with all things equal. But for a lot of people, all things aren't equal. So if they start out and they have a previous back injury, for example, or if they start out and they have bad, unfavorable leverages that aren't going to allow them to have a great tolerance to a whole lot of deadlifting volume, for example, or something else. All these things need to factor in as sort of extenuating circumstances that we have to, put an asterisk next to our workouts and sort of look at the athlete before we actually look at the program. So with all of that said, when we're thinking about strength training and we're thinking about going heavy and we're thinking about the chronic pain that we might be experiencing and whatnot, we got to ask ourselves where our starting point was and what might be contributing to this. Because, it asks a lot of our body. It asks a lot of our body to be pushing 90%. How old are we? That's another great question to ask as well. A 19-year-old is going to have a very different response, with all things equal, compared to a 39-year-old who wants to get knee deep in strength training and really get as strong as they possibly can, given their training age is the same. So there's so many factors to consider, and it was a huge mistake that I made early on when I considered training my when I was training my clients when I was younger. I was 21, 22, 23, and I've got a 46, 48, 52-year-old, and I'm thinking that they can have the same work capacity and the same adaptations and so on as somebody who's 22 years old, and that sort of thing just comes with time and experience and realizing that everybody's not the same, and programs don't work the same on everybody either.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you get started, you don't really know what kind of elements you should consider. So I'm curious what you do in terms of your assessment to figure, where someone needs more fitness on that spectrum.
Yeah, so my assessment process, if you want to even call it that, is extremely simple. I always stick with grassroots as much as I can, and I like troubleshooting by sort of working my way backwards. So first things first, I'll see how the person's moving in just the most general form. I have, maybe 4 or 5 legit mobility drills that I like to put my clients through when they're first timers with me. And they end up usually being drills that I end up using for a lot of our warm-ups and so on going forward. But these are good telling drills. I like the Spider-Man walk. I like the sideline rotations. I like high knee walks and cradle walks and all kinds of things like that. Squat with a reach overhead, all kinds of things like that. Pretty basic stuff that can really be telling with regards to all your load-bearing joints and how mobile you are really and how stable you can be too. And after I see that, then I might jump into actually testing like a primal movement pattern. So your squat, deadlift, overhead press, chin up if applicable, a row pattern, and just see how the body moves under light load or under no load even, just to see how the person can move. If I have an advanced client, then it's going to be a piece of cake for them to at least get into the exercises, and then we could troubleshoot from there. And if I have a beginning client, I can still see from a grassroots perspective, here's a very light load out, or a goblet squat or something like that. Let's see what you're doing. And from there, so I've sort of gone, whereas a lot of coaches might do a whole bunch of muscle tests and things like that, I sort of go right to the end point. I want to see how you actually do the exercise itself. So let's take a look at your overhead press. Let's take a look at your squat. Let's take a look at your chin. Let's take a look at your row. And then when I see mechanical breakdowns and so on, then I can start sort of troubleshooting, picking it apart, and then regress. And then we could work our way back up to that in the future. But maybe we have to use bands for this, or we have to use a limited range of motion for that, or we have to use such modification in order to sort of serve the client best. I find that way, in terms of just like what can we take away from this, is sort of the best approach, in terms of just more of like a subtraction approach rather than sort of going upwards. And that's sort of the way that I've always done things, or at least for the last number of years, that's the way I've always done things. And it's been pretty useful. It's been pretty successful. So I'm intent on sticking with that.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. It's really important. Instead of like, you could look at the single muscle and yeah, maybe you have weakness in part of your delt, but let's see how you perform those movement patterns. Because I say that tells you the most info. Because a lot of times when I was studying in physio school is, the manual muscle testing, and okay, how do we see what grade of strength your bicep has versus, really looking at the bigger picture. And I'm sure you agree with this as well. Everything's connected. It's the whole kinetic chain. Like, taking one piece out, maybe it's weak in isolation, but in compound in a functional pattern, it can be a very strong, component of that. And I think that's important to look at, so we know how our strength training is going to transfer over to other disciplines. But if we're just, as you said, just testing something that's not really applicable, then it's not going to really help us with our strength goals long term.
Yeah, at a medical clinic that I worked at before I went on my own and trained solo, I was a trainer at a medical clinic, and it's a very, very sort of practitioner-y kind of clinical type of way of looking at things, what you just described, where you might look at a deficiency in a muscle, you might look at a weak link in a chain, and then you start really hammering away at that weak link and saying, okay, well, because this is weak, we shouldn't do this, this, and this, because this is weak. And then you start going into very sort of remedial and rehabilitative and rehab-based movements in order to sort of fix the weak link. So the intention there is great, but at the same time, it starts limiting somebody's exposure to using their whole chain, and maybe even just exposing in a good way those weak links to the actual thing. So something that I like to say often is that, and let me think, I wrote it down a few times when I've blogged about it and stuff, but I think that I say that our body is as resilient and strong and, that sort of thing. It's as resilient and strong as it is fragile and, injury prone. So we usually always focus, especially in training, as erring on the side of caution and being on the injury prone side, where we say, okay, you know what, we shouldn't injure. We have to look at this weak link. We have to make sure that they're safe and staying safe. We're not going to overhead press at all with this person because of this shoulder problem and his rear deltoid here, and here, right? And so then all of a sudden, the entire training sessions go by without any sort of bearing load overhead ever, right? But at the same time, getting somebody to do an overhead press, or to test an overhead press, or to expose them to this, and maybe get them to, I don't know, force them into some positions here and there, it's not going to kill them 9 times out of 10. And if we're an astute trainer and we're a wise person and we could sort of gauge things properly and with the right discretion, we can put them in those positions and we can get them to get that exposure to the lift. Maybe they just have a problem with their patterning, and maybe they're just weak in the lift overall, and that's what causes the problem in the first place. But I think that there's got to be a little bit of a give and take. There's got to be a little bit of treading the line carefully and smartly, where we actually do say, hey, listen, today we're actually going to do this movement and we're going to try to get it really, really good quality. And that's where a lot of people sort of miss the mark, and they start sort of being a little bit too ambivalent or a little too overcautious, and they start turning into physiotherapists or chiropractors or rehab specialists rather than actual trainers, when the client's goal might be to just get into better general physical shape, or may have to lose weight, or they might have to build muscle, or they might want to be, just lose a couple of percent body fat or whatever it is. And, those sort of goals at some point are going to take a little bit more rigorous training than just, physiotherapy based or rehab based movements. So the people that I find have the most respect for are the best at sort of achieving both at the same time. They'll mind the weak links, they'll address the problems, but it'll be sort of encapsulated within a great quality workout that gets the job done from a calorie burn perspective and whatever else, that hard stuff that we need.
No, you really hit the nail on the head there when you talked about the quality, because I think that's really important. Is you can start working on having quality movement in that movement pattern, even if it's unloaded. And I think that's going to help a lot with that mindset coming back from injury, or whether you don't have an injury and you're just trying to get stronger and you're a little bit discouraged because maybe you didn't have the best form, you had a little bit of discomfort, but it's going to help you get over that block. Because I know it's really hard to come back from an injury and be like, oh, I can't do that. Like I had that for years. I had a shoulder issue and I was just afraid to press because I'm like, I don't want to, re-aggravate it. And that really set me back a lot because my movement patterns in the press sucked because I was just doing, pulling and horizontal pushing. And it's really important. That's something I believe in is, it's going to make you more prone for injury, avoiding movement patterns than it is to, the ones you're not doing are the ones that, could likely cause injury because your body has no exposure.
Yeah. I think about half squatting or squatting to partial ranges and whatnot. And that's a really, really good one to analyze because, depending for me anyway, depending on the goal, my thought process, depending on the goal of the lifter, is how deep they should really squat. So if somebody wants, a lot of quad activation, for example, versus somebody who wants a lot of glute activation, the depth is going to differ from one goal to the other. Somebody's thinking about trying to train their back musculature a lot more compared to, just focusing more on the legs, all kinds of things like that. If someone has bad knees versus somebody who has great knees, all those things are going to affect squat depth and what's the word I'm looking for? Depth you choose to use. But that's the key point within that is that you should be able to have the ability to exercise choice in squatting. So when somebody is immobile and they cannot squat past 90 degrees or even above 90 degrees, they can barely even break parallel at all. And if they did, then they'd get injured or something like that. Well, we have a problem because we don't want the person to stop at 90 because there's no chance in possible execution that they can go below 90 degrees. We want them to be able to achieve a full range of motion squat, and then at that point choose that today I'm going to stop at 90 degrees because I want to train for this particular purpose. So people run into problems when they're constantly repeating a pattern, and that pattern is done with insufficient range of motion because they lack mobility or flexibility, or even strength in the right areas in order to pull them into that range properly. And they continue to compound that lift over and over and add more weight and more weight. And so then you get the guys at the gym who are squatting 400 pounds, but they're barely even getting down to a quarter of the depth. And so when they end up bearing load in any way, even with body weight and some kind of a slip, for example, and their knee enters a deep range of motion flexion, well, all of a sudden they've broken something, or all of a sudden they've torn a tendon, they've ruptured something, or they've got an ACL, and out goes some sort of connective tissue, and they get injured. This is a perfect demonstration of somebody who has not been exposed in any way, shape, or form to the ranges of motion that their body is capable of achieving, or their body should be capable of achieving. And this is a huge thing that I'd like to warn people against is like, don't fall into that trap of using partial range of motion and excusing the fact that your mobility cannot handle more. Find what you can to do things with full range of motion, and then backtrack from there and work on your partial ranges and do your partial reps and your half reps and all that sort of stuff if you want to. But where you can get that full range of motion, train with that full range of motion when you can as well. It's going to be helpful for you.
And also too, I find, adding some sort of loaded mobility movement, whether it's, if you have trouble, for me, like I have trouble getting down like ATG in a squat if I'm just, doing an air squat, whereas if I held the kettlebell in front of me because of the weight transfer, I can get, ATG and keep my back straight. So sometimes it's about using the loads appropriately to assist with the mobility. And then, as you said, to just kind of help you sink into that movement and then build that control up.
Yeah, big time. Loaded stretches, that's what I like to call them. Those are the types of things that are going to really push you down to a greater range of motion. When I squat myself, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this who are listening in, when I squat myself, when I do my set with body weight and the empty bar, it usually doesn't look that nice.
It never
It's all
does.
over the place. Yeah, the bar is on your back, but you're pitching forward like crazy in my case. Knees don't feel great just yet, and the back is rounding, and your heels are coming up a little bit and all sorts of just terrible stuff. And then as soon as I put 25s on the bar, so I'm squatting 95 pounds, all of a sudden it cleans right up and it looks fantastic, and this isn't something that you should rely on, but it is something that can definitely help in terms of just when you're preparing for your heavier sets. Your warm-up sets matter a whole lot. And if there's people out there who are in the habit of warming up with anything more than the empty bar to start, then you should really seriously consider what you're doing. Um, every workout should always start with the empty bar for your squat, overhead press, bench press, deadlift. Those barbell lifts, 100% start with the empty bar or lighter. Get that patterning on, get that groove proper, and warm up and lubricate those synovial joints and whatnot, and then you're going to feel so much better when you start loading your way up and ramping your way up to your working sets. But if somebody's got a 225 bench press and they're putting 195 on the bar for their first warm-up set, this is not the way to train, and this is a way to get hurt and get injured. And especially if you start getting older and older and you're still doing that stuff, it's a great way to just really, really screw yourself up. So just a little bit of food for thought as a side note, please warm up properly.
Warm-ups are huge, and especially like coming from that background where I was doing gymnastics, I would always, we would stretch for like 25, 30 minutes before the workouts. And I carried that with me into my training. So earlier in my career as a trainer, I would just do, I would like to, stretch everything. So I do a bit of dynamic for the upper body and the lower body. And then as I started to learn more about, functional range control and active strength, I started doing more like mobility movements and stuff like inchworms and stuff like that, and open book stretches. So I find like I like to really work on the mobility and pattern that. For example, like if I'm going to be doing some pressing, I work on something like, my scapular push-ups, because that's really, for me, I really like having a really solid mind muscle connection. So I like to just go through that movement patterns. I find it's not only gets me mentally ready to lift those weights, but I just start, my body's like primed and knows what I want to do, versus when if you just like throw 195 on the bar, like your body's like, what the hell are you doing? We were just sitting at the desk. Now we're going to go pump some weights.
Yeah. And again, like I can't drive this home enough. Like that progression that you're talking about is very important. All those different inchworms and core activation drills and scapular push-ups and those kinds of exercises, they're going to be worth their weight in gold. More so if you spend longer and longer, A, on this earth, but B, working, say, a desk job and things like that, where you're repeating long days of certain held positions for a long period of time. Like you could work out all the time. That's still working against you if you're spending longer and longer doing it. So, when you're 24 or 23 or 26, even like those kinds of ages, you don't really feel that sort of thing. But when you're, even I'm 33, when someone's 40, 50, like there's a huge difference there in terms of the act of training and how it's going to affect you, and the act of neglecting things like your mobility and other elements of your fitness, flexibility, your stretching, your mobility work, those kind of drills, and your warm-ups your warm-ups leading up to your sets and so on if you're working weight. All that stuff's going to become that much more important for you. And I can speak from personal experience, not only as somebody who's not 21 anymore, but also somebody who's been very seriously injured, and as somebody who who's been in the game lifting weights for quite some time now, and since lifting properly anyway, since I was around 19 or 20. And these kinds of things, the body changes, and the body doesn't have as much resilience as it once did. And even if I wasn't injured, there'd still be so much more wear and tear on my joints, just because of the fact that I'm a decade and change deep into this stuff. And that's how we really want to think about this, because if our end goal is to be 55 and 60 and 65 and 75, lifting weights and still really killing it in the gym and having some great workouts that are impressive for anyone who's watching it as well, then we got to look at things from a different perspective, take care of ourselves now. It's just like putting money in a bank for your retirement. You got to invest the right ways. You got to make sure that you're being frugal with your money, and you're dealing with spending the correct way, and you're not making stupid decisions early on. And that's going to reward you later on in the future when you have a lot more comfort in your life and your lifestyle as a result of the work that you put in now.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we talk about wear and tear, because there's definitely ways to avoid it. But even like relating to your experience, like I've not been able to get back to where I was in, some of my lifts, say, for example, my squat, bench, and deadlift coming back from injuries, whereas now I'm just kind of changing my focus. I'm really appreciating taking those active rest days more. In the past, Like I was just like resent rest days when I was started working out when I was in my teens. And now for me, it's just like I woke up today, I wanted to go for a run. My body is not feeling anything. I'm super sore from my push day yesterday. Everything's sore. So it's something I'm really starting to appreciate more is, I want to be able to work out next week. I don't want to be sore, and in pain during the weekend. So I really like take that approach where, it's okay to skip a workout if you're listening to your body. And I think a lot of people need to understand that is, your body doesn't necessarily need 3, 4, 5 workouts a week to make change and to get stronger, but you're really getting stronger by, prioritizing that rest, prioritizing that mobility. Something I do is I'll just, even if it's a rest day, I'll just go through my warm up that I would do, say if it's for a workout I like, because I try to incorporate my daily mobility into the warm up itself. So that way, like I'm moving every day, but I'm not just, allowing myself to just keep pushing past that soreness, because eventually that, if we're not using it as a sign that soreness your body needs to recover, then we're just going to, kick the can down the road, and eventually we're going to have some aches. Whereas, I want to still be doing calisthenics when I'm 55 as well.
Yeah. You said so much stuff there that's so important for people to recognize. But yes, so like the importance, like another thing, just as an offshoot of exactly what you're talking about. So going through a rest day or going through a recovery day and stuff like that, we have to remember that, again, if we're not 18 or 19, living at home with no vehicle and no rent to pay or no mortgage to pay and no children and no spouse and all that stuff that I just listed are potential sources of elevated responsibility for sure and elevated stress levels as well, and so these things can affect the amount of stress that you have, your cortisol levels, all that stuff as well. And these things can definitely affect things like your sleep patterns too. you know you can't tell me that somebody who's got twin boys, for example, who are both a year old, is going to be getting as much restful sleep every night as somebody who's a 21-year-old who lives at home who's just a student. So these kinds of things are going to have a huge effect on just how much training you can actually get done, how much accomplishment you can get out of your training, and how quickly you'll recover once you're training as well. There's just that alone, not having a high stress job versus having no job. Those kinds of things are going to be huge as far as the difference makers when it comes to how much recovery and how well you take to your training and so on. So I think that that's something that needs to be considered. And when it comes to, your own training, your own goals and so on, especially if the difference between the two examples that I gave is also like a couple of decades, maybe somebody who's 40 versus someone who's 20. These are things that we have to really think about, and we have to do what we can and be realistic at the same time. So if it means taking a back off from your workout, if it means deviating from your difficult program for the day because physiologically you're just not feeling it, or if it means even modifying a certain couple of aspects within your workout so you can train more intuitively and be a little bit more on point and in tune with your own body and what it really needs and how it responds to stuff, that's great. I ran track in university. I ran track for a club as well outside of university, and I ran track in high school. When I was in my club track, or even in university track, the thing that was interesting was I didn't realize back then that I thought that a program was a program, which means we had practices Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday as well. For track workouts, which are usually around 3 hours long, all things considered, that's a lot of training. That's a lot of training, especially when you're a busy student as well, and you're trying to hold down a part-time job and all that stuff. It's a lot of training. Some athletes, some of the kids, they could handle it no problem. And I was somebody who was always super sore, and always by Friday or Saturday, I was destroyed. I could barely even run. My body was just trash. Some people don't respond quite as well to high frequency training as other people, even if they do have great nutrition, even if they do have fantastic recovery and so on. My nutrition could have stood to improve for sure. But even in the gym now, I've never been somebody who's responded very, very well to training hard 5, 6, 7 days per week, every single week. I might have one good week where it's like that, and then the next week I might have 3 wicked workouts, and then the fourth one is light, and then the fifth one I skip. for example, or something along those lines. So, everybody's a little bit different. There's a lot of people who have a much higher work capacity than others. And there's some people who are going to get more results from actually training less with all things the same. And so, overtraining, I believe, is a thing. Even more of a thing is under recovering. And I think that that's something, or a little bit of a trap, that a lot of people will fall into. And they got to really watch out for that. So, take it easy sometimes. If it needs to be down to maybe 4 workouts a week instead of 6, then do that. And it's going to make sure that things stay sustainable once again. It's something that you can keep on replicating week after week after week. Something that I like to tell my clients, as simple as it is, especially if they're struggling to get back into the gym, or if they're struggling to get started in the first place, if they've never been to the gym, I just say this: dude, just train every other day. Start with an every other day thing. If you train on Monday, don't train Tuesday, then train on Wednesday, and keep on going. That means that on week 1, you'll get 4 workouts in, and on week 2, you'll get 3 workouts in. And you'll know that it's going to be a very easy schedule for you to keep on sticking to as well, because you'll remember when you trained and when you didn't. And, you can take it like that. Maybe do a 3-day rotation and keep on cycling through. And it's just the easiest thing for somebody to adhere to. And it doesn't cause too much stress, and they don't have to worry about, 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, and all that sort of thing. And it just keeps it simple, and it keeps them pretty accountable while still being very realistic at the same time. And it's a good place for people to start.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also adapting that so your, fitness enhances your lifestyle. It doesn't become your entire life, because that's a trap I've made. Like, I used to be, gym, eat healthy, don't go out so I can get a lot of sleep, don't enjoy yourself. And then I've been on the other spectrum where in my first year of undergrad, I would train hard, do the push-pull legs, train 6 times a week, then, party on the weekends and not get any recovery. So I really think fitness needs to be something where if you're just jumping on a program, that program might not fit or suit your lifestyle. There's so many things to consider, and that component you brought up about stress levels is huge. You need to, that can affect you psychologically going into the workouts. Like, you might just not be able to be feeling it, and you might not be able to recover from those workouts. Where personally, it's taken me like 10 years to figure out, I like doing, low volume, higher frequency. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing, 3-4 days a week, but it's like 30-45 minutes. And I respond a lot better to that, just, keeping the intensity higher.
Yeah. And just, that's a perfect demonstration of just being intuitive with everything and realizing that your body responds best to one thing versus another. So yeah, no, 100% agree with all of that. It's got to be individualized, and it's got to sort of reflect where you are in your life, not only in terms of just your calendar age, but also in terms of just like what's going on in your life. And the nervous system, it's a very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Complicated
It's a
for
very,
sure.
very, it's delicate, and it's complicated, and we have to treat it the right way, and we have to approach things the right way with it in first mind when it comes to especially strength training. Whereas I'm not talking about size training, I'm not talking about conditioning, but strength especially. This is the most demanding thing that our nervous system's ever going to have to deal with, in terms of really, really dialing in and being able to pull something that's your 3 repetition maximum 3 times, hundreds of pounds off the ground. Now, these kinds of things we need to be on point for. You're not going to PR after a 3-hour night of sleep. You're not going to PR if you haven't had anything to eat that's of substance nutritionally for the entire week, and so on. Like, these are the times when you have to get out of our own heads, and we have to realize that our performance isn't going to be top tier and on point all the time, especially when these circumstances are considered. The best athletes in the world have off days. The best athletes in the world take rest days. So what does that say about us, whose job is not to train? We have other things and other priorities to deal with. And, there's going to be off days, off weeks. There might even be bad months. So if our goal is really to not think about having a retirement age, like how an NBA player will be done around age 40, we're not going to be done around age 40. We're going to be continuing to train and train and train until we're 60, 70, 80, 90. And so with that said, what reserves do we need to leave in the tank? What things do we need to leave in store in order to make that last? It's a great way to think about things, and it's a real perspective shift that can shock a lot of people when they look within and they realize that there's more to it than just hitting these numbers and pushing the PRs and so on.
So what are some things people should focus on? Because I know you talk a lot about like Doing things for the long haul and avoiding those PRs because it can really kind of put you in a bad place.
So number one, I'd got to say the mobility, of course. Mobility is going to be the big major factor. Um, when people don't have the ability to make their bodies move in as many degrees around a certain joint, and make muscles activate that's supposed to activate to pull a muscle into the full ranges of motion and so on, um, that's when you sort of run into problems. And it's usually a product of immobility at some junction, some joint somewhere, that causes a whole bunch of other problems too. Now, depending on how far down the rabbit hole it goes, you might have bigger problems to deal with that don't have to do with just improving mobility anymore. You know, you might need surgery on certain stuff or whatnot. You might have an acute injury that really throws you off and so on. But if you can really get used to moving well and then getting stronger while still moving well, you're probably going to be in a good place to start out. On top of that, are we looking at just more than one plane of motion, or are we looking at just one plane of motion when we're training? That's a big one. So the squat, the deadlift, bench, overhead press, lunges, all these kinds of exercises that we're very used to doing, rows, all that stuff, these are sagittal plane movements. That's dealing with up and down and forward and backward, and that's it. So if we want to think about things from a rotational, the transverse plane, rotating exercises, your split stance or your half kneeling side med ball wall throws, for example, is a good example of one of those things. The wood chopper exercise that crosses through that transverse plane as well. These are important ones too. If we want to think about the lateral plane as well, things like a Copenhagen plank or things like a lateral lunge, these kinds of exercises are going to be very important so that we can apply forces and resist forces that are coming from the sides instead of just coming from straight up and down or straight forward and backward. So I would say that those are the two first things that I would say is get out of the plane of just sagittal and focus on mobility work. Those are going to be huge. Third, I would say, of course, like we talked about, those 11 components of fitness, strength being one. We got to look at our conditioning. We got to look at our cardio. We got to do some balance work in there. We got to do a little bit of work for our reaction time, some agility work as well. We got to look at our body composition and see whether or not there's certain things we need to clean up in our diet, for example, or there's certain things that we need to train differently in order to get a little bit of body fat count down, and so on. So that's another big one. So looking at those kind of key changes first, it's going to give you a little bit more of a rounded balance to your fitness and health, and it's going to make you probably feel a whole lot better at the same time.
You bring up something I'm really passionate about because I do believe, like, especially deskbound professionals, we live in the sagittal plane. We're eating, driving, sitting, walking upstairs, typing. It's all sagittal plane, and people just think fitness like are those three main lifts. Whereas I find, getting stuck in that trap is what can cause a lot of our injuries, is that muscle imbalance. Like if we don't move in the other planes our body was, designed to do fundamentally, then it's going to affect all those fundamentals we've talked about earlier.
100%. And so that's why we got to look at things in terms of just being able to apply forces and bear loads from multiple directions. If our shoulder can do this action right here, then why aren't we training in some way in that action? Why are we only doing presses overhead like this? And so we got to look at things in terms of more about movement and functionality than we have to think of than thinking about just muscles themselves. And another point that I want to bring up as well, in terms of another starting point for people, a good way to get that long haul health, I'll call it that sustainable long haul kind of training, is thinking about it not in terms of weight lifted or in terms of progressive overload, not thinking about it from a numerical perspective, thinking about it in terms of rate of perceived exertion instead. So when you start gearing a workout or gauging a workout based on your own personal rate of perceived exertion, it changes the landscape a whole lot in terms of even your methodologies or your modalities that you're using to get your workout in. So my point being, let's say that you can squat 400 pounds. Well, how could I make 185 pounds feel like 400 pounds? What can I do in terms of the way that I perform the repetitions or the way that I engineer my workout itself to still feel like I was working just as hard? But at the same time, I'll be sparing my joints a whole lot of headache from the fact that we're lifting way less weight. So things like that. And a good example of how I would approach that would be maybe shortening my rest interval, maybe applying a huge tempo to my workouts, maybe applying paused reps to my workouts or to my sets. All kinds of things like that could make a lighter weight feel a lot heavier. I like the challenge of being in a poorly equipped gym or in a condo gym or something like that, where I don't have access to a full, set of 100-pound dumbbells and all that stuff. And all I got is it goes up to 50. So what am I going to do for my bench press workout? If I was planning on doing sets of 10 with the hundreds, well, maybe I'll do some slow tempos with the 50s, or I'll do 1.5 reps with the 50s, or paused reps with the 50s, or I'll compound set those 50s with some push-ups or other body weight work and other stuff like that. That's going to just positively impact my health and wellness in a great way. And I'm not so focused on the number and focused on really, really loading up with all this heavy weight all the time. And this is going to be a great way for you to challenge your challenge your joints in a great way that doesn't involve as heavy weight. And, it's going to be pretty functional for you as well.
So is there a way that you can maintain your strength training and lift heavy while minimizing that wear and tear? Because I understand that we both agree that progressive overload is super important, and obviously slowly increasing the weight. Like you don't want to increase your bench 50 pounds in 1 month because you know your tendons and connective tissue won't have that capability. But is there some sort of like, I don't want to say continuum, but a way people can still, would you suggest they just work with the tempo and bands and stuff like that, or instead of just constantly just trying to be in the mindset if they have to get stronger in terms of the numbers?
Well, look, I think that this is a loaded question because, first of all, usually somebody's max effort, and when it approaches their max effort for the squat, bench, deadlift especially, it starts looking not quite perfect as far
This
as
is very
form goes.
true.
And if we're goal, like, it really depends on what the nature of your goal is. If your goal is truly to get stronger and stronger and stronger, well, then at some point you're going to have to be stuck using that progressive overload method. And there's not really any ways around it. And there are different aids that you can use in order to sort of get through sticking points and, functional isometrics, overcoming isometrics, band work, chain work, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. You can do cluster reps and cluster sets and so on. And so it's going to give you ways to sort of push that threshold and get more out of your repetitions that you're doing. And that's all great. These are all tools that I've used personally and I've used with clients as well. But we have to sort of reassess the idea of how strong is strong enough. When can we get to a point where we say, okay, I have the strength that I need, have the strength that is impressive, and I have strength that is going to be good for the long term. And now I have to think about something else here. So for me, maximizing my strength personally, it's not something that's been on my mind for a number of years now, except for, of course, getting back to where I was before my major injury that I got. But outside of that, my bench numbers, even my squat numbers, my deadlift numbers, my overhead press numbers, like, I've spent years lifting very heavy. And so from that perspective, I'm pretty good. And so I've been really focused on challenging other aspects of my fitness in order to really, really, make sure that I'm not walking around hurt all the time, or make sure that that weight that I could lift, it sticks around forever. So instead of constantly thinking about getting stronger and getting stronger and stronger, how about getting strong and then sort of staying strong for as long as possible? And that's a little perspective shift that I like to use. And I think that for a lot of people out there, if they're in the place where they're lifting hundreds of pounds off the ground and they're pressing hundreds of pounds away from their chest and so on, if you don't compete and you're not a competitive weightlifter in some form, then you got to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing and when do you know to stop and change things up a little bit. And that's going to be the real answer towards getting somebody, in a good place where they're strong for a very long time.
It reminds me of a convo I was having with a friend earlier this week. We're talking about goals and how, why are we always focused on getting stronger or getting to our long-term goal? Like, at what point can we just, focus on enjoying the process and really appreciating it? Like, I think this might have been one of my clients. He's talking about, like, should I always focus on my long-term goal, or should I just be, grateful for how strong I am right now? And it really made me think about it. I was like, you know what? Like, one of my goal right now is to do a front lever. And, I'm just, and at the same time, that's my goal. But I'm super grateful that, I feel like I'm the strongest I've ever been. And I'm like, I have much more appreciation when I enter my workouts. I'm like, I'm really strong. This is just, this is fun. Let's step back about why I got started into this. Because you don't always need to think of that goal. Like, if you're just dragging your ass through the workouts and not enjoying it, then what's the point, right? So be really just to, be strong enough.
It's a huge, and a lot of people who hear that, they might think, oh, this guy's copping out, this guy's making excuses and this, that, and the third. It's not about excuses. It's not about anything like that. it's very, very incidental to young lifters, especially, and immature lifters. And I don't mean people who have a problem. I just mean people who lack that maturation or the maturity because of not enough years spent doing it yet, who will think that strength training and PRs and your numbers and killing it at the gym every single time you go there, and all the quotes that we can think of, walk in, crawl out, pain is weakness leaving the body, and blah, 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 that all these things are real life and all these things matter and so on. And we take inspiration from a lot of, competitive bodybuilders and a lot of competitive powerlifters and weightlifters and so on. And sure, all that stuff is cool. An intense workout is cool. All that stuff is great, and it can be motivating, and it can really, really be a kick in the pants for somebody who might be unmotivated, for example, and so on. But at the same time, we have to know when to draw the line and realize that there's more to it than just that. And it feels so much better for a lot of people if they're not competitive people, for example, if they're not competitive lifters or whatnot. It feels so much better for a lot of people when they make that transition from beating themselves up for missing a PR or for having a weak workout or whatnot to enjoying the fact that they had a workout that they were able to scale back, and they still found a way to make that workout feel great given the circumstances that they were placed in. So yeah, I had 90% max effort deadlifts to do, and then I was going to do weighted chin-ups, and then I was going to do weighted dips for a nice full push-pull workout, and it's going to be awesome. But then my deadlifts, my back and knee wasn't feeling that great today. And, for the weighted chins, I was just plain weak. And by the time we got to dips, I was just depleted of everything. And I also had a bad sleep the night before, and I didn't have breakfast yet. So here's how I'm going to change it up. I did the deadlifts, my back and knees started feeling bad, so I scaled it way back. And instead I did RDLs with dumbbells. And then afterwards, I still had to do weighted chin-ups, and I decided to do them body weight instead for a few more repetitions, and I added a couple sets to that, so it still felt great, and I got a wicked pump. And then after that, I had to do weighted dips, but I was so tired, so instead of doing weighted dips, I just decided to do a French press instead and hit the triceps real good, and I superset that with close grip push-ups. Totally different workout, totally different goals even that workout creates for somebody. But at the same time, it still makes you leave the gym not feeling like you wasted your time, and it still makes you leave the gym feeling accomplished. And that's the real key. It's not you forgot all about the fact that you were supposed to hit a PR deadlift for the day when you start thinking about different ways around things, so you can still occupy that time purposefully, but still having a really, really good and solid workout at the same time.
A lot of jam-packed, really great advice there for sure. And it's true, because a lot of the times too, like, it's not doing a specific exercise or a specific workout that's going to paint the entire picture of what is going to get you results when it comes to your fitness goals. Like, it's really like having that individualized approach, and even being intuitive is what's going to get you the results. Like, auto regulation is so huge, and a lot of people are like, this workout is going to help me build muscle, and if I change anything, I'm not going to build any muscle, whereas that could be in fact completely wrong.
Yeah. The workouts themselves, that's like 40% of it when it comes to how much muscle you're going to build, or how well you're going to perform and so on. We have to not forget about the fact that, like, getting stronger, like, the workout is supposed to break muscles down. It's up to you to build the muscle back up outside of the gym based on the things that you do and the habits that you take on and create. So whether your goal is to get stronger or have a better performance and so on, we got to train in a way that's going to train us, number one, but number two, outside the gym, how are we recovering? How are we resting? What's our nutrition like? Are we supplementing with anything if that calls for it? All these things are going to be important. What are our stress levels like? What are our triggers outside? Are we staying up really late? Are we partying hard? Are we overtraining? Are we undertraining? Are we respecting that recovery? All of those things are going to come in hugely important when it comes to whether a goal is to get stronger, whether a goal is to attain fat loss, whether a goal is to get bigger muscles, whether a goal is even just general conditioning. And I have to think pretty far back now in terms of the days when I was really focused on, especially like the strength or size goals compared to other stuff. It's just so much more relaxing when you don't have these direct goals about, these numbers need to be met, and I need to get this 550-pound deadlift by this time, and so on, when really no one cares if you don't hit it, and it shouldn't matter. And you're lifting 500 and something pounds off the ground. That's a lot of weight, and you're probably narrowly escaping an injury with every repetition that you do at that weight. So the better way for you to go for it is to maybe take things down a notch, maybe change up the goal, change up the perspective, maybe even change up the way in which you're training, in terms of, instead of deadlifting that way, maybe you do a 1.5 rep deadlift or a pause deadlift instead with 300 pounds. And you're sparing everybody a huge headache when it comes to, your joints, your connective tissue, all that stuff. So I don't know, like, just when it comes to all of these kinds of things, when it comes to these kinds of goals and having lofty aspirations for as much progressive overload and so on, we gotta think about this twice. We gotta look at things from a broader picture and from a longer term perspective. And when we do, we'll usually answer the questions that we had for our own selves. And it's the smart thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. You also have to think of, I really like how we're talking about how you want to be. It's not just, 6 months from now getting that strength goal, but it's really like, where do you want to be 10 years from now is really huge, is reminding people to look at the long term when it comes to that. Because a lot of people just want, look good now, but they don't think of, at what cost are you achieving this goal? Like, is this going to cause you injuries? Is this going to cause you more stress? Is it going to take away from other things you like? Like, everything's going to have a cost. So you have to make sure you're making the right calculations here when, whether it's, what are you training 7 days a week? What is that taking away from your life? Or, there's a lot of different examples here, but I think that's something people really should consider is not necessarily the cost, but, like, what is going on for you to achieve that?
Yeah, it's very easy for somebody to fall into exactly the things that you said. Me in particular, like the whole, I want to have, this result as soon as possible, or I want to look this way now, or I want to get leaner now, or I want to get this or that strength gain now, and so on. Yeah, I'm so much off of strength right now in terms of like trying to push these PRs, but I still train to maintain strength, which means that I'm still lifting heavy quite often. And, I'm always going to be concerned with, body composition and so on. I'm always trying to challenge by way of conditioning and trying to find good methods that will maintain or create lean body and body fat percentage and so on. People are going to train for aesthetics. It's not vanity. It's not insecurity. Aesthetics is you train because people look good from training. And so people would like to look good. And so that's it. So all those kinds of things, they're going to factor in, and it's very easy in popular culture and with the world that we live in and so on to want the results as soon as humanly possible. And so we'll train, and we'll train harder, and we'll train harder, and so on. Now, the other thing is, if you have a period of time where you have the opportunity to train harder than others, we have to remember that there's going to be a period of time where that doesn't continue on, or that we're not going to be able to maintain that. I'm a perfect example of that right now, because during COVID and all this stuff, I have so many more hours in the day to work out and train. And so I've been going very often, I'm taking 6 days on, 1 day off, that sort of thing. Now, I said earlier that I don't respond that great to high frequency training and so on. Well, my circumstances have changed. My circumstances allow me to get 8 hours of sleep every single night. My circumstances allow me to not have to wake up at 4:55 a.m. for my first client, and so on. I can time out my meals and my diet, and everything like that is way better. And so all of those things are factoring in as well. So it's enabling me to not have my typical lifestyle, which would sort of create a little bit more barricades or barriers for me to actually be able to train as frequently and train as well and adapt to it as well as I could. So knowing this, COVID in some ways has sort of been helpful in terms of creating a different norm for the time being. But I do know that, whenever this comes to a close and gyms get back to full force and the city goes back to the way it should be, that things are going to be different. And I'm not going to be able to try to sustain training 6 days in a row or 7 days in a row and then taking 1 day off and so on, and having 2 and 3 hour workouts and that sort of thing, which is in truth what I've been up to these days. So, we all have to take things into perspective, and we have to realize that, in the name of sustainability, we have to, even if we do have windows or pockets of time where we can really, really push it, know that this is not going to be something that's forever. And, there's going to be that sort of ebb and flow, that crest and trough when it comes to our training sustainability and consistency. And that's what's going to sort of build our long-term training outlook, I guess, or spectrum, for lack of a better term. And yeah, the real answer is just to not have any periods of time where we totally fall off and quit, because that's when things get the hardest for us to bounce back. So we want to make sure that if we're training hard, maybe the next month I'm going to take it a little bit easier, or I'm going to focus on other elements of training. Maybe I'll start running a lot more than before. I'll do some sprint work more often and change it up in that way, or have a body weight training day. So I'm not lifting heavy all the time. I'm not all in the gym weight room floor all the time either. So yeah, no, we just have to really, it's sort of like thinking intuitively, but not just workout to workout, on more of like a mesocycle approach, where it's like across the board. So not just in the micro, but in the bigger picture too. How are we looking at our next 2 months of training versus our next hour of training?
Maintaining strength is so underrated. Dropping a lot of knowledge bombs here, because a lot of people like don't understand that maintaining strength is so important to prevent injury. Because like I don't know where it was from, but I heard, when you take that week or 2 weeks off for vacation, when you come back, if you don't do anything, that's when you're at your highest risk of injuries. When you start to go back to, you were benching 225, you go on vacation, 2 weeks off, like maybe that can injure you now. So it's really good to just appreciate what you have and be okay with maintaining your strength, and maybe even lifting the same weights, but less rest, lower RP. That's extremely underrated and huge advice right there.
Yeah, especially like certain people are going to be better at certain lifts than others as well. And so you use the bench press as an example. Personally, I like there will be periods of the year where I could bench press really heavy for like I will hit the great numbers and so on. And then there are other periods of the year where like it doesn't take much for my bench press numbers to nosedive compared to other lifts, especially. And so if I'm not focused on benching, or it's not part of what I have in my system for the time being, well, then I'm not going to be benching 3 something and 350 and all that stuff. There's no way. It'll be like 270 gives me a hard time. And those kinds of things, we have to come to expect them. It all depends on how we're sort of making our program work for us, and how much time we're willing to put into a certain lift. And it's easy for someone to get discouraged by that if they, take a week off, for example, and then they hit the gym again, or they take some time away from a particular exercise and then they hit that exercise again, and it's all the way in a totally different place than it was. We have to remember that at the end of the day, none of this stuff really matters. So if we're already strong enough to move our body weight in multiple directions, for example, if I'm 260, bench 260, squat 260, deadlift 260, and I do it for a few repetitions here and there, well, then that's already a great start. So now it's a question of maybe instead of thinking about getting stronger and stronger and stronger, we know that we have that baseline. And we know that we can probably pull and push a whole lot more if we've been training for long enough, or we're training for higher PRs. That's great. So now what are we going to do with that 225 or 260 or whatever that we couldn't do before? Maybe we find a new rep PR for it. Or maybe we find a new tempo PR style for it. Or we find a new paused rep, like just different things that can make that weight work for us in a better way, and use that RPE to our advantage. So just generally speaking, I think that looking at things from what we can do with our submaximal loads and how we can diversify our training in those ways, it's going to sort of pay the most dividends to our training than just being able to say, oh, today I bench pressed 365 before my PR was 360. So, that's so that can only get you so far.
Awesome stuff so far. So we're gonna finish off with my favorite segment, the rapid fire questions. So I'm just gonna ask you a few questions. Just give me a quick response from the top of your head. So my first one for you is, who is your greatest inspiration and why?
Um, Mark Ripto is the first name that came to mind because of how methodical he is in teaching the primal movement patterns, and how clear his explanations are, and how difficult they are to argue, because he uses physics and logic very, very well, and he's a great with his cues. And so that really shaped the foundation for a lot of the ways that I explain exercises too, especially those big lifts like your squat, bench, dead, overhead press, and chin up and clean, those major lifts. So that's probably the first name that comes to mind there.
Yeah, he's definitely a pioneer for sure. So what is your morning routine like? I know obviously it's changed a bit during COVID, but what is something you do, to help you get in that mindset to start the day?
Um, I don't really have anything specific to answer with that one. Honestly, I'll get up and I'll have my do a few mobility drills. To be honest with you, I like doing a deep squat first thing in the morning. It really gets sort of like the joints going and whatnot. And especially since I've been pretty seriously injured, that's really important for the knees. So that's really all I can say. A little bit of mobility, but other than that, I sort of just get going. When I'm being good, I like to have a green tea in the morning as well, and that sort of creates a nice little energy boost too. I'm not a coffee guy, so that's about it.
Yeah, I got some green juice right here. We're keeping it coffee free this week. So, what is something you'd recommend desk-bound professionals do every day?
Postural work, I'll say. And when I say postural work, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do stuff with weights themselves, but doing things with resistance bands. I don't think that there's any way that somebody can overtrain their upper back. And those are the muscles I'm talking about when I talk about posture. So, grab a resistance band or lie flat on the floor on your stomach and do different exercises that are going to help engage those upper back muscles. It's going to be huge. People who are checking out YouTube, my name, you could check out uh, the lava clap. Lava clap is a great postural exercise. And it sounds like gibberish, but just type in Lee Boyce lava claps on YouTube and you're going to see a great plate transfer exercise that's going to be great for the posterior chain muscles, and it's going to be good for mobility as well, the shoulder joint. So that's a go-to fire exercise for you.
Awesome. Definitely gonna have to check that out. Super, super cool. So, gonna come at you with some harder questions here. So, if you had the world's attention for 1 minute, what would you say?
Are we talking training though, or are we talking about like what are we talking about?
It's up to
I'll
you.
keep it. I'll keep it training. I'll keep it training. First thing that I'd say is that we have to realize that the fluff that exists in the industry with regards to sort of like cosmetic training and Hollywood bodies and so on, we have to realize that a lot of that stuff is a little bit all that glitters types of situation, or that kind of a too good to be true kind of situation. We look at actors and we look at a lot of celebrities and so on. We see their bodies and we see, we even hear in the media like, okay, X, Y, and Z actor shed 50 pounds for this role, or gained 35 pounds of muscle for this performance or for this role as this boxer or as Batman or whatever it is. And it's like, well, these are being sensationalized in and of themselves as well. There's no way that a person who's been training, especially if they're like 38 years old in this movie, there's no way that somebody who prepared for this movie for maybe 9 months or 8 months or 6 months or whatever it is while they were filming gained that much actual muscle in that short of a period of time. It wouldn't even happen when somebody's 19 years old and have the perfect genetics on their side, or they have their hormones in the perfect place for them to be building muscle just by looking at weights. And we're not answering the entire question by saying that this person built all that muscle. And even if they did, it's just way beyond. We have to remember the resources that a lot of these people will have available to them, and we have to realize that we haven't even ruled out the idea of some kind of performance enhancing drugs too, which can play a huge role in the rate of change that you see. So behind the scenes, when you peel back the layers, not only are people exaggerating a lot of stuff, but on top of that, people are not exactly realizing the scope, or realizing the reality of their situation and their resources compared to what ours are. We cannot compare ourselves to professional athletes. We can't compare ourselves to professional musicians or singers or actors and stuff like that, who are making millions and millions of dollars per year, and who are being paid indirectly to have a certain look. They're going to go to certain lengths in order to attain those things. And that's not the reality for us who work regular jobs, who have other responsibilities, and who are just in the rat race, right? So we got to think about it from that perspective. So that's probably what I'd stand on a pedestal and try to say to the masses in order to not be fooled by a lot of mainstream media, and give them a better perspective on fitness and health.
No, I love it. This is what I'm going to use for the 1 minute preview on Instagram for sure. I'm going to drop this knowledge right
Okay.
in center. So, my favorite question to finish off is, how would you describe fitness in, 1 or 2 words, and what it means to you?
One or two words to describe fitness and what it means to me.
Let's get these gains, baby.
I would say staying strong. I'll say that. Staying strong. So, because that's the most all-encompassing that I can say that I can give you, because it's not about getting anything. It's not about getting gains. It's not about being big or being lean. It's about remaining that way. And the act of staying or remaining that way means that it has to take its course over a long period of time. So sustainability is key. And so not just getting strong, not making gains, staying strong is why I say that. And when people think about it that way, it changes the game in terms of just how fitness is approached for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of the what you hear, train insane or remain the same, where it's, train smarter and maintain your strength.
Yeah, exactly. Training smarter, remaining strong, so maintaining the strength, and that's going to take a lot of smarter training than just trying to push those numbers and push the envelope with your PRs all the time, as we discussed over the last like 45 minutes.
Awesome, man. So really appreciated you coming on this episode. Where can people connect with you and stay in touch with your content and your message?
So I have a blog and well, my website. I shouldn't call it a blog because it's got so much more stuff than that. But my blog is leeboycetraining.com, leeboycetraining.com, and it has archives of all my published articles for different publications for fitness information. And then it has my own blog on it as well, which is where I sort of talk about different things that I see in the industry and the fitness culture and different areas that I think that we should be more aware of. So yeah, that's my website. I'm trying to think of the online coaching is on there as well. If somebody wants to get involved with me with regards to online coaching, so I have that as well. And you can contact me for in-person coaching whenever this is all over, of course. And what else do I have? I have a new feature on there called the form check, which is basically where you could submit a video of yourself doing an exercise that you might have been struggling with and have me give a full scale feedback and critique of that exercise. And it's it's a little bit quicker, it's a little bit shorter, so if someone can't afford maybe the full-fledged online coaching, they could get at least a little bit of a touch up for their form and up to 3 different exercises in one shot, and they could submit that to me and I could give you back that information. So that's my website, and Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter all across the board. It's at Coach Lee Boyce, so you can find me there. And I put up information every day on Instagram and on Twitter every day. And on Facebook, I usually use that as a hub to share a lot of my articles and the odd video as well. So Coach Lee Boyce for all 3 of those, and you're going to be in full view of all of my stuff.
Yeah, I highly recommend you check out his socials, especially his Instagram and Twitter. Like, I learn something new every day because Lee drops the hottest quotes. Like, they're straight facts every day. Great take-home points. Really appreciate you coming on episode 29 here. It's a big milestone for the podcast. And we're off the races to
Awesome,
100.
man. I appreciate it myself. It was a great conversation, and I hope to be back on at some point too.
Yeah, absolutely. Season 2 for sure, for sure.